fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCW 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren, Mr. John Copenhaver. How you doing?
I am doing splendidly, Al. How are you?
Enjoying your vacation?
My vacation, I guess. I don't know if I can have a vacation. I just write all the time and teach occasionally, so.
Yeah, well, I saw some pictures of you. You were like in the sun, weren't you, or something, doing something wild?
Maybe earlier this summer I was in Charleston, South Carolina at the beach, but recently, other than going to the Cure concert, which I was telling you about earlier, which was great, I've been kind of like my head in my new book, so boring.
Yeah.
Well, not to me, but probably to the rest of the world.
Yeah, you have to get out there and cause some trouble, you know.
Yeah, I know, right?
That's how you get things done.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of trouble, we've got a guest that's caused some trouble. So we have to have her in here now and talk about why she's causing trouble and what's going on here. You know, how does she get there? So let's welcome Miss Jillian Lauren. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. May I steal that, speaking of trouble, for the title for my next memoir, please, Al?
Yeah, do it. Go for it.
Okay.
Go ahead. I'll write a review page.
And I also want to tell you, John, I completely understand that there's no such thing as a vacation. I remember there was one, weekend, my husband and I decided, I imagine this was pre-kids, to go to Vegas, have one night, go see a show, and we got to the hotel room, sat down, and he was just like, just take out your computer. It's fine. It's really fine. You don't have to pretend like you actually want a vacation. And I think that's sort of, that's the double-edged sword of what we do. You know, like we're compelled, we're driven, we have a sense of meaning. We're infuriating to the people around us who want to go see a show or the beach.
Oh God, right, I know. It's like I'm sitting at the beach and like fidgeting.
Yeah, like I'm supposed to enjoy this. I just had to schlep a whole bunch of chairs and make sure my kids don't drown. And I can't write. I can't write under these conditions.
Story. That's how it is. But so then why do you do it? Like, what is it about you that is that holds your focus so strongly?
I would say through the research I did on this book, which was never meant to be a book, it was meant to be an 8,000-word article for New York Magazine that I thought, it would put a bunch of heat on an underreported serial killer, might be able to expose the fact that he had killed many more people. And, I'm a person who's driven by curiosity, and creativity and probably a little bit of that OCD. And to tell you the truth, runs in the family. And once something gets a hook in me, gets a hook in my brain, and then gets a hook in my heart, and this story really did, that's when it turned into a book and a true investigation. And, I believe my growth as an investigative journalist.
Yeah. Well, I think this is great. You've done it the right way in the sense that there's a lot of true crime out there because it's kind of exploded in the country. But you're not just like writing secondhand. You go in there and you meet And of course, this is documented on the documentary from Starz, Confronting the Serial Killer, and now the book. And you spent time with the killer. You got him to confess. So you're really involved in the story as well. You're not just taking secondhand or third hand. You're actually doing the job. That's quite the commitment, but it also, I think, it puts you up with the great true crime writers myself. It puts you in that place where when someone reads the book, they're getting the real goods. They're not getting second, third hand information.
Absolutely. And that was not the plan, Al.
No.
This was going to be my real moment of traditional reportage. You know, I'm very well known as a confessional memoirist. You know, in many different subjects, because, you know, many, like I said, I'm driven by curiosity. I'll, you know, follow whatever I find compelling. And I've always found crime compelling, but, you know, I certainly didn't mean to insert myself in the middle of the story. Part of my intention was to take myself out of the center of the story. As I began working on this project, I was working on a novel, which would be my second novel. My first is a book called Pretty, which was the first book I wrote. And, you know, I was craving like that trip into fiction again, you know, that trip into my mind again, in which I could inhabit other characters. And yes, of course, always sort of telling my story, because what other story do we have on this earth? You know, I have these eyes, I have this brain. But, you know, to go to those other lands, we go to writing fiction, and I wound up in a conversation with Detective Mitzi Roberts, who is a very fancy detective at the LAPD Robbery Homicide Division. She is who, if you're a fan of Michael Connelly, and really who isn't, the Renee Ballard character is based on Mitzi. And I can tell you that the real thing is even more stunning. And I did an interview with her that was about police procedure. It was about certain historical crimes that she, as a cold case specialist, knew about. And it wasn't until the very end that I asked her, you know, what's the case you were the most proud of? And she said, I'm proud of them all, but I did catch this serial killer once, and that was pretty cool. And it was the last watery remains, the iced tea of this interview that nobody gets with this. I was like, I screwed this whole thing up. And I just said, I buried the lead. And she said, I'm not the one doing the questions.
Yeah. Wow.
Which is very Mitzi. And she had me. And I was like, well, tell me about this. And she explained that there was this serial killer, Samuel Little, who had been convicted in 2014. She was the lead investigating officer on that investigation. You know, there was a very exciting cross-country manhunt to find him when, you know, what happened was DNA technology caught up with him, and a Department of Justice grant to the LAPD allowed them to screen cold case evidence, and they were able to find 3 matching hits on 3 cold cases, murders of women in the late 80s in South Los Angeles, where women were turning up in dumpsters nearly every morning. We had 7 or 8 serial killers, active serial killers, in South Los Angeles during that time, because it was so both over and under policed. It was a very underserved community and a community of invisible women, essentially. And Mitzi told me that she knew that he had killed many more women across the country. He had a rap sheet like no one had seen. Like the district attorney, the deputy district attorney, Beth Silverman, who prosecuted Sam, also prosecuted Chester Turner, Michael Hughes, Southside Slayer. She's the one who like takes down the big sexual serial killers. And even she was like, I've never seen a rap sheet like this in my life. Brought tears to my eyes because every single day they had him, and every other day he managed to kill someone else.
Right. Now, this is Sam Little, and so we don't even at this point, even now, do we know how many people he actually killed, like even before what's confirmed, like maybe in the 60s and early 70s? And that,
Again, in the early 70s. Yeah, I believe I do have a pretty comprehensive count. And everyone wants to know the number. And I don't know that it will ever be known with exactitude. And I realize I did jump the story a little bit there and, not say that once I realized that there might be all these other victims, that was really what got me contacting New York Magazine and saying, I think I can do this thing. Here's my angle. I'm going to talk to the killer. Started writing to him, got myself into that prison and began to do the interviews that elicited the confessions. So not all of these are my confessions. These are the official confessions to the FBI, to local jurisdictions, 93 confessions, 63 confirmed as of now. And I actually got to, for the first time in a long time, I think it's been almost a year that we've had another solving a case. I made a map at the beginning where, like a traditional map where I put pins in it because it was so hard as the numbers started mounting. It was really so hard for me to wrap my head around what I had gotten myself into, talk about having a talent for trouble. Inserted myself into the middle of a federal investigation and the body count is mounting. And it's even hard for me to get my mind around, like that every single one of these was a person. So I made this tactile map and I got to change out a pin the other day. The red pins are for the unsolved and the black pins are for the solved.
So this really, in a sense, it starts out as something quite a bit more innocent. I guess that's a type of word I'll use here, but it sort of starts out with something else in mind, and you get drawn into this, and now you feel, let's say, an obligation or a need to go further and find out more, and even the truth and what's going on. And it sort of, I guess in a way, it obsessed you in a sense.
It took a minute. It didn't start that way.
Right. Right.
It started, you're right. I mean, and I wouldn't even say innocent, like I think a lot of people, betray me. And the documentary that Joe Berlinger made about me, documents me a little bit further along in the process of when I really started to become involved in these victims' cases and the victims' lives. But, when I first walked into that men's maximum security prison, it seemed just like an adventure, a surreal experience. As a writer, you're always looking to see a world you've never seen. I certainly have never seen a visiting room in a men's maximum security prison. I did know a few scumbags that I called who had done time there at California State Prison LA. And I said, like, how do I do this? And they totally gave me the rundown. They're like, okay, you can try to get an appointment. You're not going to get an appointment. Leave your house at 4:30 in the morning. You're going to start lining up at 6. They let the visitors in at 9:30. So bring a book. And it's true. The cars line up and, and then you get your number and you go in and you wait. And I had no idea what I was waiting for. I was so prepared. I really thought I was so prepared. And I do have an ace in the hole that I always have to admit. My aunt is a very famous psychiatrist who has worked at Harvard University for 40 years and is a famous diagnostician. And, I've been like begging her to tell me, how to do this, how to talk to a psychopath, what it's going to feel like, what it's going to be like. And I remember her last piece of advice was, don't wear an underwire. You're going to set off the metal detectors. And it was the one thing I forgot. You always forget something, you know. I was like, I had like everything clocked in my mind. I had like 4 different cards in my pocket. If I couldn't get him to talk this way, I was going to try to get him to talk this way. If I didn't, you know, and then I was like, I forgot Underwire in my bra, and there are no sharp objects around.
No.
And so I had to chew it out in the bathroom, you know, and the women who were there visiting the inmates were like, "You got this, girl. Chew that out."
Jeez.
And then I
just
had
took
to
mine
bring
off.
the underwires to the sheriff's deputies,
Right.
you know, and I was like, "Here they are." Don't ask me how I got them.
Don't ask, don't tell here, okay?
You know, and I walked and it was, I mean, the feeling of that prison is biblical. It's one of the largest prison industrial complexes in the nation. You know, it's tremendously overcrowded. It's in the middle of a desert, that is either 110 degrees or 40 degrees, and changes in a second. You know, it really had this feeling of punishment in the middle of the desert. And, you know, I walked into B block and I expected everything I'd seen in the movies, which is how we process these things. This is how we think we understand crime, or we don't understand. It's not edited with a soundtrack you know, and that I thought there'd be a piece of glass and the whole hand thing and the telephone, and you know, and I walked into a visiting room that was little plastic tables and inmates visiting with their babies, and you know, and Legos in the corner, and a photo booth and vending machines, which I knew to bring quarters from those scumbags. Bless them. Said, do not go there without quarters. The vending machines are not cool. And I just guessed and picked a couple things, picked some Funyuns, some Little Debbie cakes, a couple Cokes, and sat down and was watching the wrong door. And that man was in a wheelchair and he rolled up behind me and he said, you know, "Ooh, you are my angel come from heaven to save me. God knew that I was lonely and he sent me you." And I almost inside, it's like,
Yeah.
I was watching the door. You know, and you'll hear me laugh. And, you know, I think that's something that you'll find very common. I mean, you'll find it common amongst cops. You'll find it common amongst people who, you know, I mean, there were times I was spending 18 hours a day with my head in crime scene photos. And my husband was saying, like, do not wind up that scene in the movie where you're like passed out at 4 a.m. and a like spread of crime scene photos on your office floor and one of our kids walks in. Exactly what happened. Exactly what happened. He was like, "I told you like 3 months ago, don't do this." But it did, you know, like the farther I got in, the more it compelled me. And also, you know, when I began to see the efficacy of what I was doing and the results, and also I'm a bit of a fighter. I mean, it's one of the things that I connected about with Sam. You know, he was a middleweight boxer. He was sort of a failed boxer. He was a boxer in prison, you know, and he was a big man with catcher's mitts for hands. And I also am a boxer and I know a lot about the fights. You know, so in our first conversations, you know, I'm saying pound for pound, who you think's the best? And he was like, "Who do you think you are?" You know, like little white girl walking in here, like pound for pound, who do I think's the best? You know, and his answer, in case you're wondering, was Sugar Ray Robinson. You know, and that's sort of how I thought of it. Going into a match with him, I was like, what if, you know, okay, so your fighter's Sugar Ray Robinson, mine Sugar Ray Leonard, like fast, you know, like that man is fast and can dance, you know, and you're not going to get a hit in. When I sort of had to start playing those games you play in your mind when you have to keep yourself composed and difficult situations, like I'm Leonard, like
Yeah.
you can't touch me. I mean, that's the champ. You can't touch me. That's the champ. But, yeah.
Then you whip out the underwires from your bra and say, look at this, bud. I just chewed these out.
Yeah. I'm too smart. I'm too fast. I'm too pretty, and you can't touch me.
Yeah.
But then walk out to the car.
Yeah. That's
and
what
cry.
I did. Yeah.
Exactly. There just wasn't. There's not a place for it in there.
Plus, it wouldn't sit well, right? I mean, you'd be a mess if you lose it while you're there.
Well, I'd be an unworthy adversary.
Right. At least in his eyes, and then that would be the end of it in a sense.
Right. He'd be bored. Right. He'd be,
yeah.
I mean, he needed a good fight.
Yeah. I have to, because I did the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, when I met, the first serial killer I met,
mm-hmm.
I was kind of in the same boat as you. I went through and I tried to find out things ahead of time, and it was all the same. It sounds very similar, only he didn't come out in a wheelchair. But the thing is, I found him not to be what I expected him to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that in itself was kind of something that threw me at the beginning, because I had all these expectations. Did you feel the same way about Little?
Absolutely. I knew I was getting into the ring with a liar. And, my aunt had told me, she's like, don't expect him to even be able to tease the lies from the truth necessarily. Like, he may have been telling himself this story about his innocence the whole time. He may yet believe it. So maybe take some time. And that was actually one of the great gifts of this story. Although it did take a toll on my life, is that I had that much time to really observe and sort of, tease apart, some of the really this incomprehensible braid that is, that are these aberrant criminals, these sexual psychopaths, these people who kill other people for fun. And for most of us, that's, I don't know. Al, did it leave you at the end? Did you have like a big answer, a big why? Because I don't either. Right. I think I say in my book, like here's a Jungian interpretation. Here's a conversation with one of the top neuroscientists in the world doing PET scans on psychopathy here, or antisocial personality disorder is the clinical designation. I'm sort of just, talking in a colloquial way with you guys right now, and how we talk about true crime. And what I think interests us so much about it is we're just like, why? And I started to wonder by the end of the interviews if, the questions just had to be more complex. Like, not only why, but, like, how does his apologism for himself, his greed, his, just essential nature of wanting and taking. He wanted it. He took it. He figured out justification afterwards. It generally had to do something with St. Paul on the road to Damascus. I was like, Jesus is not your apologist. And he was like, well, you think that because you're a sinner. But don't worry, I don't hold that against you. And I was like, you actually do.
Thank you.
No, I was like, no, you do though. Like, you hold everything against me. And that above all. And I believe that he was talking about my first memoir, which is about, me being the mistress of a prince when I was a teenager. And, the inmates were teasing him. I was a hoe. He's like, you're a hoe, Jill. They're telling me you're a hoe. And I was like, all right, then. Well, I'm not a perverted, maniacal, murdering maniac.
Yeah.
So I guess I win this one. But, I really did talk to him that way. Not right away.
No, you have to get that.
But eventually we got there. I found it so similar to the, interviews I'd read, to the work you've done and to, the experience people have had with serial killers. They have the same sort of references. I think there were some times I'm like, y'all didn't grow up in a world in which no other people existed who were serial killers, right? It's not like a zombie movie. All of a sudden, people are like, what is this thing? There's some disease that's turning people's brains into, what do we do with them? Like, you've never seen a zombie movie?
Yeah.
In your world here, there's no zombie movies. But in their world, there are serial killers. And I do believe that they sort of crib from each other. Their sort of references, their apologies, their insistence on being saved, on being forgiven, being right with their makers. And, if you're not, that's your problem. If my victims weren't, that's even a bigger problem.
Yeah, they deserved it then.
Do you think that they don't even understand why they do it, and they're trying to make some sort of, it's an excuse, but it's also meaning for themselves out of it? Is that part of it? Or do you think it's just like pure deception?
I think, I asked Sam, and he was a very intelligent man, and we broke it down. There were things. There was head trauma. Mm-hmm. There was sexual abuse. As a young man, there was, long periods of very abusive incarceration, things that will mess up your brain. And perhaps if, all of these genetic and brain structural, if that time bomb is already there and the switch gets flipped, I asked him, if any of those things were different, though, do you think that you would have been different? And he said, no.
Wow.
I said, what if there was some 12-year-old boy who's like, stealing detective magazines and jerking off to necks and thinking about strangulation. And for him, he was unable to get an erection unless he believed he was killing somebody. And, his entire sexuality was about death. And, I said, what if there was a 12-year-old boy and, he was stealing these magazines, and he was looking at this imagery and he was having these thoughts, what do you think could be done? He said, nothing. Like, I do believe that he thought he came baked as he was, and that God made him as he was. And therefore, in some ways, he was the victim. Why did he have to be born wanting these things?
That's remarkable. Like when I'm thinking about this whole story, I continue to think about two things. One, of course, is, Sam himself, but also the system that allowed Sam to do, maybe allowed isn't quite the right word, but the systemic problems that we're having as a country, whether it's racism or how, we work through criminal justice, like that also seems pretty horrifying.
Well, John, I think that allow is actually the word that I use in the book. There's a very famous Bobby Kennedy quote that is, every generation gets the criminal it deserves and the law enforcement it demands. And, my commentary on that was, I'm not sure that Sam Little was the criminal we deserved. I don't know if I felt comfortable saying that, but, I will say that he was the criminal we allowed. And there were many systemic problems within the criminal justice system, and also, like both federal and local. And one of those problems, is still very much in contention, and something that could make great strides in law enforcement is, our VICAP system, our Violent Criminal Apprehension System, which is a federal behaviorally based database. So it's not just DNA. It can connect behaviors across jurisdictions, across the country, right? When otherwise there is no mandated system. Like somebody's killing, then there's this one random killing in Macon, Georgia. There's another random killing in Long Beach. There's a random killing. And until those behavioral patterns and now DNA start to get connected, it becomes very hard to catch serial killers, and people who kill strangers. So, traditional gumshoe work doesn't always do the trick. But that's not mandated. It's voluntary. Canada has a very similar system that's mandatory and it works exceptionally well. So a lot of what I started to learn was that, there was a lack of communication between jurisdictions, that certainly at the time in the 70s and 80s, and looking at many of these communities in the South, there were transgender victims. It was illegal to be transgender in Florida. Who's going to report a transgender woman who goes missing? Her friend is going to walk down to the police station, get herself arrested. And so, Sam worked very much in these shadows, in these loopholes. And I like to point out that, we got the law enforcement we demanded. I don't feel like we were necessarily, or that all these victims were necessarily like, victims of the cops. Because Sam was, or dismissal by the cops. Although that was certainly part of it. There was a code that was very popular in Los Angeles in the 80s, and they called in a homicide of a prostitute, marginalized woman of color found in a dumpster. They would say, there's a homicide, there's 187 on 55th and Central, and it's an NHI. There are no humans involved. Or, there's a jumper on Van Ness. It's a no one. So, there certainly was that, the idea that there are people that are worth more and people are worth less in society. But I believe that as a society, we create those hierarchies as well, because, Sam was acquitted by a jury of his peers. There was a failure to indict by a grand jury. Sam served 18 months of a 4-year sentence, that was pled down from attempted murder to, happened to be a victim who lived, pled down to kidnapping and assault, served 18 months, got out of jail in San Diego, drove to LA and killed 2 women that night. So it was so much like the larger social dismissal of violence against women, and particularly these women who had, in many people's eyes, just put themselves in harm's way. Why were you on that street at that night? Why did you get in that car? And why are you a credible eyewitness? As credible and amazing as some of the eyewitness testimony was, just their character made it discreditable. And that was us.
Yeah.
That wasn't just the cops. You can't,
Right.
You can't just, blame the FBI. We have to all take responsibility for, I mean, like the Bosch TV show, just because I was working with the cop the character was based on, he was really helping me work my way through this investigation. I was lucky enough to work with, retired police detective Rick Jackson, said everybody counts or nobody counts. It's sort of it's a slogan from a fictional character, but the LAPD has sort of taken it on as their own. And it's one that I really held close to my heart as I worked on this. Everybody counts or nobody counts. And everyone's got to be in on it.
Yeah.
And it does take time. Yeah.
It takes time. I write, because even covering some of the murders from the 60s and stuff, gay murders, you look at the police clippings and you look at the reports in the newspapers and the police chief, homosexuals are criminals. I'd
Right.
never hire one, so that's that so that's the mentality of someone in the 60s, let's say in the police force. And you can't have them be in that job for 20, 25 years. And all of a sudden the government goes, well, we've changed the law. It's no longer illegal, and have them just change their feelings overnight. Like that's a big
I've talked
problem.
to some who have,
Yeah.
and I've talked to some who haven't,
Yeah.
but I really have talked to some who have said, I talked to some cops in the South who said, I'm ashamed
Right.
of the way that we treated the black prostitutes in this town in the early 80s, that you really couldn't commit a crime against a black prostitute. It wasn't considered a crime.
Right.
That person was less of a person to begin with. Wasn't where their resources were going to be allocated. So I have had cops been very thoughtful, and take their comeuppance, and also, fight for cold cases now. And a lot of retired detectives will do, volunteer work on cold cases too. And so I think that the advancing technology gives us a chance to make some reparations. But we have to care to do so. And that's what I hope to do with this book. I mean, I don't write message books, I'm not on a soapbox. I didn't walk in there politically motivated. I walked in there probably both opportunistically and personally as a victim of domestic violence, probably a little angry, want to take this guy down. That was definitely in there and grew. But what I really want to do, I want to entertain people. I'm a writer. And by telling this story that I believe the scope of it's not just the gruesomeness of the murders. It's, the victims' lives are fascinating, and I do a deep dive into them. The law enforcement officers are incredible characters. I have a real cowboy in my book. I have a real giant 6'3" cowboy. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. I was like, you are 6'7" in that hat. You are really wearing that hat. I'd never seen the Texas Ranger. Someone said to me at a party, they were like, are you having an affair with a baseball player? I was like, I'm going down to see a Texas Ranger. They said, are you having an affair with a baseball player? I was like, oh, thanks, but no. No, I'm really actually going to meet a Texas Ranger. And,
A real one.
yeah, a real one. And, and he taught me a great deal as well. Texas Ranger James Holland, and he was, a complicated character in my life, but certainly spearheaded this effort, and a tremendous amount of respect for his passion. So, I did get this incredible, quilt of this country, and have been left to grapple with many of my own feelings. And I sort of, you caught me on a weird day. Can I tell you why?
No. Yeah. What's going on?
Because I'm having the first sort of little private event for my book. My book comes out on the 18th of July, of this month, 18th of July.
Yeah.
You can get all kinds of great pre-order incentives right now on my website. And I woke up this morning and I've been answering a lot of questions where people say, you became impassioned about giving these women back their voices. Like their voices were taken away from them. And you have this voice. I mean, really, please, you couldn't shut me up. Just try to interrupt me. Not even you, Al.
No, I understand that.
But, and I sort of woke up this morning and I was like, oh my gosh, it's the other way around. Like, there was always something that just like a little bit tonally hit wrong for me about it. I'm like, I'm giving these women back their voices. I was like, I don't have the power to do that. I don't even necessarily have the right to do that. I would pray to them, like, please, just like, let me give it a shot. I'm the best you got. No one else is going to try. Let me give your voice a shot, And then I woke up this morning and I was just like, they gave me a chance to like express my voice, like express my anger, about the violence that I've seen and, and the weight of this that I've lived with and the voice in Sam's head and the fury, and the years of my life I've spent, as a woman in this world, and a troublemaker, like you pointed out. We do tend to get into trouble. And I thought, the gift has been that this book kind of gave me my voice, not the other way around.
So how do you think this has changed you, this whole process? Because I know whenever I do one of these things, it's kind of like how you're describing. It's all over the place. There's all sorts of emotion and feeling and anger and happiness, and there's all sorts of thoughts that go through the mind, and the whole time that you're doing it, it's up and down like a toilet seat, So
I have 3 boys in my house, so yeah, just about exactly like that. Yes.
So but at the end of it, when you're looking back now, this is coming out here shortly. So it's just about done, and it's out to the world. It's theirs now. So, but how is it for you? How has this changed you? How are you different now compared to when you started this process?
I'm a more serious person, and I know that doesn't always read. There was a sort of a flippancy or a glibness that I think that was a defense mechanism for me always. If you can be clever enough, right? I'm small. I'm not that small, but I couldn't give you a fight. And so, my mouth has always been my greatest weapon. And I just started to put my head down into the research and take myself seriously as a journalist and take myself seriously in courtrooms and realize that, there are just some things that like this armor that I built are not going to protect me from. And they're certainly not helping anyone else. They're certainly not helping any of these women. They're certainly not helping, like that kind of steeliness is not helping me tell this story in a vulnerable way. I'm going to have to drop it. Not all the time. It's still there. It's hanging, it's hanging by the door. I'll put it on before I leave. But, it made me a more serious writer and a serious journalist and a serious person. And I don't think that that's necessarily made me a whole lot more fun. Scott's like, way to bring down a room. If anyone can bring down a room, it's you. Can we not do the murder tonight? And, and I also hope that just like it raised the level of my writing, every project does. You think it's supposed to get easier? I think, this is my 5th book. First one's still in a drawer, my very first attempt. So it's the 5th book I've written, 4th book I've published, I have 2 New York Times bestsellers. Isn't it supposed to get easier? And I find that each book gets harder. No. Sort of the bar raises. And, also, I'm kind of sucked in now. When I started, I was like, I'm not writing about serial killers the rest of my life. I'm not looking for an entire career in true crime. And then, it turns out I do sort of have a way about me and, a talent for it. And one of the victim's sisters who I'm very close to and actually works in the military, at one point I had an honest conversation with her and I said, look, I'm so glad that I was able to, be able to provide some closure for your family. I don't know that I can keep doing this work. And she said, I don't know that you get to choose. Like the work kind of chooses you. So I do think that at the end of this project, the work has chosen me and I'm going to continue with it.
Right. What's the biggest point you want people to take away from the book? There's the entertainment, and there's, of course, all the things that went on in the case, and the knowledge that they'll learn, and from your interviews and stuff. But at the end of the day, is there something you want a reader to be aware of now after reading this book? As
you said, you walked away from a conversation with your first serial killer with all your assumptions challenged. I'd like to do the same. I'd like to challenge people's assumptions, and not just about these monsters who fascinate us for good reason. Monsters are fascinating. Monsters are frightening. I want them to go away with questions about, humanism and questions about themselves, how we compartmentalize, how we judge people, how we allot worth in this life to a human being. And I would love to invite them and all these amazing web sleuth communities, who are so committed and brilliant, and dive through the Charlie Project, the Doe Project, and NamUs, and really are I think a great resource for this country. I want to invite everyone in, not just in the search for Sam Little's victims, although that's become my specialty right now, closing that gap between the confession number and the number of clearances. I'll still be working on that, but just to look at the challenges we're facing, with our law enforcement, with our system of communication, and with how we look at each other as people. Are you on social media? Do you have a website, and you TikTok, dancing, and all that stuff? Where do people find? You will not find me dancing. I do get maced. I do some self-defense. So you can find me on TikTok, Jillian Lauren author, and that is where I'm doing a lot of missing persons. I'm, talking about true crime. I do, book reviews that people really enjoy. Sometimes even, movie reviews. I do some self-defense, just basics of self-defense. But for the most part, I'm talking about cold case victims and unsolved cold cases, and inviting people into that conversation with me, and talking about what it was like to have this long-term friendship, relationship, dialogue with a serial killer, and people are interested in that. And so TikTok. My Instagram is Jillian Lauren. I think I quit and rejoined Twitter every other day. Yeah. But it's Jillian Lauren. It's Jilly Lauren. My assistant was like, I think you just lost all 19,000 of your followers. I was like, I don't care. I'm so pissed at Elon Musk right now. I don't even care. But I think I'm there at Jilly Lauren now, Facebook, whatever. But my TikTok, I'm very excited about. I'm putting a lot of work into the missing persons work there, and my Instagram as well. Well, fantastic. Not only will I follow you on all those, but yeah. Oh, and check out, like I said, we have these incredible pre-order incentives on my website right now, JillianLauren.com. Fantastic. We're going to put all that up on the website so people can find it and get out there and great book and see what you're doing on TikTok. But with everything, how was the pandemic and trying to finish this book during the pandemic for you? Did it have a big effect? It was, it had the effect that it had in all our lives, I think. Depending on how much of your life was spent out in the world. So much of my research was on foot, frankly, really walking around, talking to people. And all of a sudden I was in my home, setting up a homeschool at 4 a.m, and trying to finish this book. I'm under contract. I can no longer visit Sam. I'm talking to him on the phone. All the cops I know who all the detectives that I know are in uniform. And in the streets, there are protests and I was in the middle of shooting a documentary. So Joe and the documentary crew were meant to travel to all these other places in the country and wound up setting up camp in my driveway. We had a COVID truck in the driveway and had to finish the documentary in my house, which I'm actually the one thing that always makes me really, really happy about. Well, there are many things that make me happy about the last episode 5 of Confronting a Serial Killer. I'm very proud of. The cameras happened to be there when I solved a murder. What are the chances? So they really caught that moment when I got the call. And people are like, you made that up, right? Like you did it again. I was like, no, that was actually me getting that call. That was like, are you sitting down? That case is still open. The name is Alice Denise Duval. It matches all your details. Congratulations, kiddo. You just solved a murder. And I was like, wow. Just like the shock, the tears, so the camera's there. And, my 2 little dogs who have since died, they were very old, had a beautiful glamour shot in episode 5. So I was like, at least Calvin and Peanut had their moment in the sun. So there's that. And, then just JillianLauren.com. You can find it all there.
Fantastic. Well, we appreciate you being on the show, talking about your life as the serial killer hunter.
Whisperer, slayer, hunter. I don't know. There are a lot of words they use. I sort of think of myself as a humanist above all. Possibly a bit of a hustler. I was raised by a gambler.
Yeah. There you go. Says it all. Yeah. So now the book, Behold the Monster, Confronting America's Most Prolific Serial Killer. And we appreciate you being here. The author is Jillian Lauren, and thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.